So hello, everyone. This is what, our 12th Barichara Updates, I believe. We're getting up there. We just keep rolling in this. And today, the way that I wanted to host the conversation is I wanted to do a little storytelling. So instead of, I thought about preparing slides, but then my life's so crazy. And this week, Tyler and I have been, well, Tyler and Rachel show up at our house at 5:45 in the morning. I serve them coffee. And then at about 6 a.m., we all leave, Tyler and I with our massive machetes, and we go to clear trails on Las Albercas. And so I thought I would rather go and clear trails than prepare slides for you this morning. So you can get a first-person account from Tyler what it's like to swing a machete at the base of invasive grass instead of, in lieu of having photos. But I've also been holding this sense that there are a couple of really interesting things happening that I think the storytelling around what is happening will be plenty illustrative, will reveal a lot for us about what's happening in Barichara and how it's progressing. And so I have really, first, like just an invitation to sit back and relax and feel into how crazy the damn world is. Yeah. Like Dan was just chatting with us because he's in the middle of California where basically the whole state's burning to the ground. And what is that like? And so, Pakistan is like a third of the land mass of Pakistan's underwater, or was a few days ago. And, we could make a list of what are the planetary crisis events of the week. That could be like a fun little Post-it note game. Because we want Post-it notes because we want to just like replace them with the next thing, because that's what's going to keep happening. And I want to do storytelling around 3 themes today that will help maybe be a bit of an antidote to that craziness of the world. Maybe give us a little bit of a breathing space for feeling into what we can really do instead of sitting in the pain and the misery of those news stories. And so what I want to do today is share with you in sort of personal narrative form some of what is happening here. And then we can have some discussions about it. And I think I will spotlight myself so that I can actually be like in something almost like presenter mode for this part and say that something that I feel really strongly is happening at the moment is that there's so much complexity in the world in general, and so much complexity in what's happening here in Barichara that, as many of you have experienced in previous updates, it's kind of overwhelming to try and track it. And so what I want to do today is to tell you some stories about 3 different topics. So sort of like tell you 3 stories. And then from these 3 stories, I'd love to have a dialogue about what's happening here, how we can learn from it, and how we can bring it to other places. And so one of these stories is going to be about a defunct organization, a flagship project, and cultural healing that's needed after decades of violence. The second story I want to tell is about what happens when we begin an education process with children from a regenerative perspective and what begins to emerge as we begin to prototype sort of in situ, in vivo, and like in a petri dish of reality, the formation of a community fund and what a community fund looks and feels like as a real world process, and how different it is from what we normally think of as a fund. And then the third thing is how the energy is evolving around this Refi Barichara event and the dynamism of just how multifaceted it is, and therefore how confusing it is. And how the confusing nature of it is creating schisms and confusion for some people, and it's creating like deep empowerment and clarity for other people. And if you don't see both, you don't really understand what this thing is. And so I want to tell these 3 stories. And the first story to begin is the story of the dysfunctional organization. I talk a lot about Bioparque Moncora. And so a lot of you know this beautiful project started in 2009 by two amazing women, Camila and Vicky, who are both in their mid-70s now. And for years, they've done this sort of thankless work, planting trees in bare clay that's basically like concrete for years until it eventually became a thriving community forest. But the part of the story I don't talk about is the organization that owns the land of Bioparque Moncora, which there's a little element to this that comes in two parts. We're in Santander. Santander is a department. In Colombia, they don't have states, they have departments. So in Canada, you have provinces. In the US, we have states. In Colombia, we have departamentos. And we're in the department of Santander, which is the birthplace of the independence movement against the Spanish crown, which actually started here in Barichara about 150 years ago. And there is an Abraham Lincoln type president from Colombia who was born in Barichara, got about a third grade education, became a lawyer, an amazing orator who was famous for his persuasive arguments and his integrity and authenticity. But unlike Abraham Lincoln, who tried to hold the Union together as it sought to segregate during the Civil War of the United States, this president from Barichara named Aquileo Parra was the person who tried to create bioregional governments in the 1890s. He tried to create regionally, relatively autonomous governments for each of the departments, and starting in Santander. And this began a deep process of segregation and conflict between people called the conservatives, which is basically those who wanted the monarchy and aristocracy, and the liberals who wanted liberation or independence from the Spanish crown, which continued for years to come. Barichara was the birthplace of the independence movement against the Spanish crown. So this guy, Aquileo Parra, was a representative of states' rights in a US jargon and department rights in Colombia. And he actually helped create the Camino Real system that is here, which is based in indigenous stone paths. When they extended them as a regional trade network, it's because they engaged in the 1,000-day war for independence, and they wanted to create their own local economy with their own infrastructure, which sounds awfully bioregional to me. So there's a long history of this. I tell you all of this because the name of the association that owns the Bioparque is called Asociación Aquileo Parra. It's named after this ex-president. And it is an organization that's been around for about 50 years. And another thing to know is a little bit of the background is Santander in this region, about 30 years ago, in like the 1990s, was the most dense concentration of cooperatives anywhere on earth. There were member-based associations and member-based cooperatives organized by the Catholic Church with a really progressive, community empowerment-oriented leader who helped build a culture of community empowerment and community organizations. And Asociación Aquileo Parra is one of those. It's a member-based association. And for decades, they have engaged in community services of various kinds, including affordable housing, healthcare, various things that they've done here in the community. But now they're mostly just a bunch of old people who don't really do much with 40 members and one flagship project that is active, which is Bioparque Moncora. And Bioparque Moncora gives basically zero support to the Bioparque in the 14 years of its existence. They just have a benign neglect for it. And so what happened this week comes from the history of clan-based, think like Scotland, where there are these clans that fight with each other, or in the US context, you have the Hatfields and McCoys, where they basically had blood feuds for generations against each other. Here in Santander, there are clans and clan-based culture. And so there's a lot of xenophobia and fear about outsiders by local people. And with more than 10 years of exploding tourism, that has really relaxed quite a lot. But back in March and April, when someone set 4 fires as intentional acts of arson in the Bioparque, we don't know who they were, but an interesting thing happened was the executive committee of Asociación Aquileo Parra decided, like half of them, decided that that crazy gringo, Joe Brewer, must be the person starting these fires. He's also probably a drug dealer. He's probably engaging in satanic rituals. We don't know what he's doing there, but we better report him to the commandant of the police. And you can imagine, by the way, 2 of the 4 fires that happened were when I was in Colorado with Penny. So this is like such an absurd set of accusations that there's a question like, where did this come from? And we even have reasons to suspect, although we do not know, that someone from the association, possibly someone from this executive committee, may have actually started the fires to try and create trouble for Camila and Vicky, and blaming me as a way of getting to them. But that's totally in the suspicion realm, although that is the best theory that the local police have at the moment, is that something like that may have occurred, which means we have this basically defunct organization with 40 members that has a symbolic project for the whole territory, the Bioparque, which is this incredible, inspiring project. And there is probably a little bit of jealousy among some of the people in the executive committee for what Camila and Vicky have accomplished. And this project has been around since 2009. These men on this executive committee have never once set foot in the Bioparque in 14 years. Not once. They sit down in the town, a 5-minute walk away, complain about what's happening in the Bioparque, say whatever they want about me and what I might be doing, whatever Camila and Vicky might be doing, and they never once visit. So there's this really interesting situation where there's severe need, urgent need for cultural healing. And so after the accusations were made that I was the cause of the fires, a healing restorative process was initiated within the executive committee, where we have this beautiful man named Rodrigo, who's a champion of the Bioparque, who's respected by the members of the executive committee. And he represents and advocates for the Bioparque. He started recommending that Camila and Vicky tell the story of everything the Bioparque has done in the last 2 years. And that the executive committee hear this story and that I come and they can meet me and ask me questions and we could begin clarifying what's actually going on. And so Camila and Vicky created a 10-page document of all of the universities that send research teams and students, all of the high schools here and in other parts of the territory that send their kids on a weekly basis to the Bioparque, all the work we've done with syntropic agroforestry and the food forest and just on and on, like this 10-page list of everything that they're doing. It's like kind of amazing how much is happening in the Bioparque. And we meant to have a meeting with them about 6 weeks ago. 10 minutes before the meeting was supposed to occur, all of the members of the executive committee decided not to show up and left us hanging. And so this week, on Tuesday, we had the follow-up meeting where we attempted to have that meeting again. And this is really, I'm sort of giving you background, although I think all of this is part of the story. Because what happened on Tuesday was a moment where a pro-social process began in a rudimentary form for healing and transforming Asociación Aquí Leopardo, to possibly turn it back into a transformational organization of the community. Because what happened was this: Camila and Vicky and Rodrigo and I were at the meeting. There's a woman named America who's Colombian that is the kind of fiscal person. She's like in Penny's role. She handles the bookkeeping and everything. And so she's in the executive committee. And she is a huge advocate of the Bioparque and has been reading my book because she speaks English and learning what we're doing with our 3 generators and all of this. And then these 3 men from the executive committee come. They all arrive 20 minutes late. And they show up sort of stern and quiet. And Camila and Vicky start telling the story of everything that's happened. And at one point they say, we have these 7th and 8th graders from the high school or from the school that are here. And then one of the men says, my daughter's in 8th grade. She was in the group of 8th graders that were here yesterday in the Bioparque. And she came and told me what's happening in the Bioparque. And you could tell he was very impressed by what his daughter said. But he was more impressed by his daughter than by Camila and Vicky, interestingly. And so we continue and the story unfolds and we're all talking about the things that are happening and it's kind of like overwhelmingly beautiful what's happening in the Bioparque. And then after that sharing is done, one of the men sort of sternly says, Camila and Vicky, we want you to know that we're actually not against you and you don't have to defend yourselves. And we think it's wonderful everything you're doing, but we have a request. And they said it in that sort of stern, critical, don't show that I'm impressed sort of way. Sort of saving face for them. And he said, and we really want you to tell us what you're doing before you do it so we know what's happening, so we don't hear about it from other people, which is something they've said multiple times. and something that Camille and Vicky have been telling them. And I've been writing like work plans of what we're doing, and we've been doing this for a year. So actually they say that and we've been doing it, but you know, whatever. It's a well-received message. And then America, who's the sort of the spokesperson of reason and advocacy for the bioparque, says, well, actually, this is a two-way street. If you're going to request this information from Camille and Vicky about what's happening in the bioparque, we would request that you start to show more active interest in this project. Come and visit it and see it, ask questions, be curious, and then we can start a dialogue. And then another thing happened is there was a man there named Pacho. Pacho is replacing Rodrigo because Rodrigo and his family are about to go to Argentina for a year. So our champion of the bioparque on the executive committee is about to go away. And he's recruited Pacho. Pacho has been working in human rights for 40 years. He is an amazing human being. And he has joined our work in the Territorial Foundation going back to mid-June. So he's very aware of what's happening in the territory and all that we're doing, not just in the bioparque. And he starts saying, not only does he agree with America that they should show more interest, but that just last week, there was some money available for human rights to go to the empowerment of women in the community. And they were talking to this network of women called Mujer y Vida that our friend Margarita works extensively with, and that they would love to give them some money to support their work, but Mujer y Vida doesn't have an organization that works. They don't have a bank account that can receive the funds. And if only these organizations structured themselves to work, they could readily receive this money. And that the association that owns the bioparque could do that. Pacho knew about the foundation. He just didn't say anything. He was just showing them they could think this way. And then he said, also, there's a lot of money for conservation. And this land that is actually worth about $1 million US, the land of the bioparque is extremely expensive land by Columbia standards, that by making it available as a community project, they could declare that a philanthropic gift to the community, and then they could leverage it for fundraising for conservation money. And Pacho's just saying this, and these three men are like, click. I had never realized the bioparque could be this profoundly important asset for bringing money into the community. And you know, Pacho's just doing his thing. He's a brilliant strategist. He's worked in the nonprofit world for a long time. And he's just letting them know they could think differently. And what I felt beginning to emerge was two things. One, why did these men sort of demand that Camila and Vicky tell them what's happening in the bioparque? I've been here for 3 years. In those 3 years, I've heard Camila and Vicky say things like, Joe, if you bring in money from the Barichara Fund and you're going to help build a structure for rainwater harvesting and put in a tank, let's just pay it directly to the contractor. Don't tell the association, because if they knew you were bringing this money, they'd try to keep it for themselves. So you see, their fear and distrust of the association kept them in secrecy for years. And I think that's really what the executive committee was speaking to, that they could feel that Camille and Vicky were trying to hide things. And Camille and Vicky felt that they were trying to thwart them or steal from them or hurt them and were being defensive. And I could sense from the history of violence here that this is a place where we're arriving, probably for the first time, in a moment where this organization could be transformed and the whole organization could become a champion of the bioparque. So I wanted to tell you this story to just give you a sense of the richness of history and culture, organizational dysfunction and possibility, all centered around a meeting with like 8 people. 8 people in a meeting representing so much more. Just to give you a feel for how, as we talk about creating a foundation and supporting community funds and weaving our projects across the territory. And one of our flagship demonstration projects is syntropic agroforestry in the bioparque. So those efforts are already interwoven. And here's an opportunity to transform the culture of the principal owner of one of the most important pieces of real estate in the whole territory, Bioparque Moncora. So I just want to tell you that story so that you could start to sense into how powerful this moment is. Pacho arriving in part because he had been participating in the work on the Territorial Foundation. And he was already a member of the association, but he stepped into leadership because he saw the opportunity to cultivate capacities for the bioparque across the whole territory with this larger work that we were doing. And as we're doing all of that territorial weaving, it is arriving into a healing moment between the men of the executive committee of the association and Camila and Vicky, with me as sort of like, a punching bag in between in the fears and suspicions of the executive committee that wasn't based in reality at all. And I felt the beginning of a profound healing process that needs to be held and supported, but it was a very precious moment. And so I want to start with that story. The second story that I want to tell is the story, what is a community fund really? And this is the story of Milena that you've heard me talk about before. Milena is the young woman who works with nature connection and developing the emotional capacities of children. And she created an after-school program with another woman named Mago. Mago is from Mexico, has a strong focus in nature connection and the sacred, and does a lot of work with medicinal healing ceremonies, with temazcal, with cacao, with other sacred plants of Meso and South America. And Mago has been working with Milena in an after-school program called Florecemos, which is We Flourish Together. It's an after-school program for kids that came into being. And for those of you who don't know, one of the things that happened when Milena arrived was I started speaking with her about the need to create a community fund for education for children and families, and how I felt like with her arrival, she could start to weave the community. And we created a clarity that if she asked for a certain amount of money for a certain amount of time, that I could probably provide it from pledged community funds for the Barichara Ecoversity to enable her to offer her educational services in service to the community while weaving other educators, families, and children into new potentials for the territory. And that started a little over a month ago. And what happened this week, 2 days ago, is that Milena asked to speak with me because she had created her Excel spreadsheet, aren't you proud? And she had documented, I give her 3 million pesos per month, which is about 700 US dollars. That's the money she'd asked to be supported. And then she created this education program with Mago, teaching with her, they're co-facilitators of it. And Milena doesn't need to be paid because she's being paid by the fund. So she donates her part of the income for the program, and that allows more money to go to Mago to support her, and that allows money to be available for materials in the program, and it allows money to be available for something more, because the parents who enroll their children in the program pay for it. They asked for 300,000 pesos per child per month to attend this program. And what she showed me was that with the enrollments of 10 children, they had brought in 2.3 million pesos, which is around like $2,000, a little bit less than $2,000. And that they had paid 1.2 million to Mago, and they had spent about 200,000 in materials for the activities with the kids. And they had 861,000 pesos left, which is around $200. 861,000 pesos. And so Milena comes to me and says, I just wanted to get your advice about how I should use this money. And I'd already role modeled to Milena how she could transform her life in service to the community by becoming a commons. And she was starting to explain to Mago that that's what she was doing. So Mago was already aware of this. And I had invited her to talk with Mago. What is Mago's heart? What is her passion? What would she most like to do if we had other resources to support her in creating a community fund for children and families? So this conversation has already started. And Milena says to me, I think it'd be really nice to be able to pay Mago some more because she actually needs to find other work on the side, and she'd love to devote herself fully to the community. And we have this 861,000 pesos. We could actually pay her more. And she wanted to get my advice because, in some way, by bringing her money, I'm like responsible. And what I said back to Milena was this. So this 861,000 pesos is the beginning of a community fund created by allowing Milena to be a commons and having surplus money come in as people paid for an education program. And that the way to practice governance with those funds would be for Milena and Mago to decide how best to spend it. And while they're practicing that, another thing has started to occur. Because Milena was supported with 3 million pesos per month, she didn't have to be worried about bringing in the money for the enrollment from the students. So when a parent said, I don't have enough money, could you give me a discount? She said, we actually have a community fund so we can subsidize you. How much can you pay? And so of those 10 children that are enrolled, 3 of those children got a subsidized rate because Milena was supported by this other money. And because those parents felt so appreciative, one of the parents, or really the set of parents with 2 of the kids who had asked to pay less for their kids, they said, we've changed our mind. We'd actually like to pay the full amount for both kids, but we'd like you to use the money that we're giving to support a campesino child from the countryside to join the program for free. We'd like to provide a scholarship for a campesino child. Now, as Milena's telling me this, I said, that is community philanthropy. This is a culture of giving. You've already role modeled it and some of the parents are responding. And you already have a community fund that you and Mago are the stewards of. And you're already cultivating a philanthropic spirit among the parents. What I'd encourage you to do in the next month is tell the parents what's happening and invite them to create a giving circle and give surplus money into this fund to support other children to participate in the program. And I wanted to tell you this story to show you how organically this community fund is coming into being through a process of cultural change, through the relationships between the people. So by providing $700 a month or 3 million pesos to support Milena, and Milena created a program that people pay for, but that she could give subsidized rates because she didn't need the money. She could actually start a dialogue with her colleague, Mago, about paying her more. And you know what Mago wants to do with the rest of her time? She wants to do medicine ceremonies with other shamanic healing women in the community and weave that back in with the ritual practices they do with the children. And so you see, Mago doesn't need to be paid just for the program they're running. She can be paid for whatever is in her heart to do that is in service to the community because it's a community fund. And because they're working with parents and children with the medicine ceremonies, Mago is already blending parents and children in the way she's working. And Milena is able to empower Mago to co-create with her while creating a culture of giving among the parents. And while we're only 5 weeks in to this process with Milena, all of this has already occurred. And so I wanted to tell you this story so you could start to see how we can create a community fund within the Territorial Foundation, which does not legally exist yet. We have not legally constituted the foundation, but we're creating all of the cultural supports that by the time we have the legal entity of the foundation, we will already have all of these relationships in place for distributed governance and for dispersal of money into projects. As we've been doing with centropic agroforestry, as we've been doing with Margarita and local food systems, as we've been doing, as I was doing earlier in the year with Diana, who works with bees, as we did as an advisory council last year with 15 projects that we supported that included the Bioparque. That work with the Bioparque enabled that transformational meeting to occur this week with Asociación Aquileo Para. So you can start to see how all of these processes are interweaving. And for all the complexity that's happening, the complexity is held in the human relationships. And so I wanted to tell those 2 stories so you could start to feel in an emotional way, what must it feel like for Mago to collaborate with Milena and feel such gratitude that Milena doesn't have to be paid so that Mago could even consider being paid more because she's doing work that's more valuable than what they would have been able to pay if their education program depended on being economically viable at the start. And imagine how Mago must feel about me, knowing that I've played this role in service to Milena that now extends to Mago because of the regenerative finance, because of the flows of value exchange among the parents, the children, these 2 women, and the money from the outside. And so you can start to feel this energy of something coming alive. And this is where I said the community fund is not what we normally think. The community fund is not a bank account with money. The community fund is the living, breathing web of human relationships doing this work. and relating to each other in increasingly creative and empowering ways. That's what the Community Fund actually is. So those are two of the stories I wanted to tell. The story of Asociación Aquí Leopada, a dysfunctional organization with a history of trauma and violence and fragmentation in a moment of potential transformation. We don't know what's going to happen from here, but it's in a moment of transformation. And the work that's happening with the creation of a community fund through a web of human relationships between women working with children and parents. And it's emerging. And then the third story I want to tell is the story of what's happening with Refi Barichara, which the Refi Barichara story is absolutely fascinating because, as I said at the beginning, it's creating confusion and schisms and stress and fear in some people. And it's creating profound clarity, insight, and empowerment for other people. And so I want to ask, why is that? Why is it that realizing that two really big conferences in big cities, one in Medellin and one in Bogota, could catalyze a moment of focus that is clear and concrete enough that people working in a space where they almost never touch their fingers to the ground finally feel like they can transform their field and begin to want to come and be a part of this? And how is it that other people who have heard about these weird technologies that don't know what they are, they can't get a straight answer because, damn it, it is confusing, become nervous about what's going on? And the reason that both things are happening is because what we're in the middle of right now is a moment of birth. That's when I ask every mother who's here, who's been through childbirth, you can imagine the exhilaration, the excitement, the love, the beauty of bringing a child into the world, the pain, the confusion, the fear, the mess, they both happen at the same time. They both happen at the same time. You don't have one without the other. And so what's happening right now is something really big is being born. And I just want to give indicators of it. I can't paint the whole picture because it's not fully born yet. We don't really know what it is, but I just want to paint a picture a little bit. So one thing that's happening is that people who have said that they may want to come are starting to commit. As Jacob and Penny have been helping with like travel logistics and getting people to buy their tickets, we're like, only 2 tickets have been sold. What the hell are we doing? Like, there's a lot of uncertainty about things. And yet there's this dynamism of conversation about how many people are excited, how many people want to be here. And we're just like right on the edge of their commitment. And what's happened in the last few days is people have started tipping into commitment. And I just want to name some of the people who are committing to give you a feel for it. One of them is a woman named Revati. Revati is the executive director of the Regen Foundation. And the Regen Foundation was created as an arm or a partner to the Regen Network to enable the creation of public goods for a set of infrastructure, for an alternative kind of economic system that fully integrates ecological restoration with economic development. And so having Revati coming is a big deal. 2 other core members of the team, Kai and Austin, are trying to figure out the logistics if they can come because they really want to be here. So it's a big deal that like half of their core team is trying to get here because it's not easy to get to Barichara. As Jacob could tell you, trying to organize buses from Medellin. It's not easy to get here. It's a big deal that someone would come at all. And then we have Gregory Landaway, who's the founder and the director of Regen Network, who is coming for Cosmoverse in Medellin, because Cosmoverse is the conversation about all the technology tools that are related to the Regen Network. So he has to be there. But his children are starting school and he wants to be with his family. So he's really torn because he wants to get back to his family. And he's actually planning on extending his time here and being away from his family for about a week longer to join us in Barichara for at least the first 3 days of our event. Those of you who are parents like myself, it's a big deal to leave your spouse with responsibility for your children, to not be present to your children during an important moment like sending them off to school. One of his kids is going to school for the very first time. So it's a big deal. And he's still planning to be here because he feels what we're doing is so important, even though he's got to negotiate all of this with his wife and with his children. And so I just want you to sense the significance of that. What does it mean for someone as important as Gregory to believe so much in what we're doing here that he's actually compromising his family's integrity for a few days to be sure he can be here with us? And then there's Sev and Sam, who both work with Regen Network, but they have their, like so many in this space, they have their own project called Ecolab and a couple of other projects they're affiliated with, and they're just connected with a dozen projects. And they work on how to measure ecological assets as a way of storing value and then connect it to local economic development by mapping value flows within local economies. And they're so excited by what we're doing that they're leaving Madison, Wisconsin, where they're living now. They're going to come to Barichara for the event, and then they're going to stay for at least 6 months afterwards, and maybe longer, to prototype their models in the real world context of what's happening here. They haven't even been here yet, but after attending a Barichara Updates call, they were like, I want to be there for that. And they are bringing others who collaborate with them. And so in the midst of all of this, there's another thing that happened yesterday, which is there's this thing called Gitcoin. Gitcoin is basically a platform where a group of organizations declare that they will provide matching funds. And then people can post projects to crowdfund their projects. And there's a specific way that the matching funds are allocated, which is this thing called quadratic funding. It's an algorithm that basically says the more people who support your project, the more share of the matching funds you get. So having 10 people give $1 will be way more powerful than one person giving $10. And so Tyler, who's here, took a lot of my previous materials about what we're doing in Barichara, structured a grant application in the form that Gitcoin needs for us to put up a Gitcoin grant, is what they call it, to try and raise the $500,000 we're trying to raise for the landscape here, and put it up on Gitcoin. And then there's a 2-week period where these matching funds are available, which is September 7th through the 22nd, which started yesterday. And so, like, for example, this morning we had 4 people who had contributed and a matching amount of $25. And then we had a 5th person donate $1, and it went up by 10 to a matching fund of $35. So the way the quadratic funding works is they keep changing what the number is because it depends on how many people contribute to all the other projects that are in the same pool. We're in a pool called Climate Solutions, and that pool has $350,000 that will be allocated to the grants in this funding round. But they'll be allocated based on the popularity of the grant by the number of people who apply. Now you can imagine how cool that is and how hard it is to explain that to people. And how easily someone can be like, what the hell is this? What do you have? You want me to create an account on GitHub and then set up a MetaMask wallet? Like, I don't even know what those words are. And I can't just give you money? And like, no, because you actually, this is the frustrating thing. Gitcoin is on the platform of GitHub. All you need to know about GitHub is a digital marketplace of open source software. It's a place where people create software and give it away to everyone else all over the planet for any kind of use you can imagine. GitHub is a giant gathering place to upload and download open source software. And Gitcoin is a project hosted on GitHub. I know this is confusing. And so you can't participate unless you have a GitHub account, and then you go to Gitcoin, but then you have to have a digital wallet. So you have to have crypto money in it. You can't just like use your credit card or use PayPal. And so that a lot of confusion happens around that. But what's interesting is just by putting the application up, putting our project up, people in that space are learning about what we're doing in Barichara. They're joining Earth Regenerators to learn about other things we're doing. Some of them are contributing money. Some of them will consider giving money and may give money. We have a possibility of breakout where if we had 100 people contribute, we might get $50,000 or $100,000 in matching funds from the $350,000. We can't predict. So it's like a game. But what's beautiful is once you post a Gitcoin project, it's always there. The next time they do a funding round, it's there again, even if you don't do anything. So we've just added a piece of infrastructure to the crypto world for them to give us money indefinitely into the future, however they may like. And so this is an example of where it's confusing. A lot of people didn't know this was happening. We didn't really know we were doing it until last Friday when Tyler said, I could draft the text because I was too busy. So thank you, Tyler, for stepping in and doing that. We threw it together at the very last minute. We got it up, like it was approved 2 days ago. And the grant funding round started yesterday. It has to be approved before the start date of these 2 weeks. And so we just did a sprint to get it done. So what I'm saying here is that there is an integration occurring across people and projects and ecosystems that is huge. One other thing that happened, and then I'll stop for us to have discussion, is an Earth Regenerators member, I won't say who they are because they haven't given me permission, sent me a message 2 days ago saying, hey, Joe, I'd love to donate to the Ecoversity. I've been watching what you're doing on the fence, thinking about it. Can I give you some money? And would you accept crypto? And I'm like, yeah. I've got lots of wallets and lots of different tokens. Do you want to do Regen? Do you want to do Ethereum? Do you want to do Juno? These are all different monies. And he's like, cool. Could I do it in Regen? And I'm like, yeah, here's my Regen wallet. You could give me Regen tokens. And then afterwards it said, or if you're on GitHub, you could give to our Gitcoin grant and get matching funds. And so I'm waiting to hear back from this person what they're actually going to do. But I just thought it was beautiful that we are weaving deeply with Regen Network and Regen Foundation. And now I have people in the Earth Regenerators community. Notice they're not the crypto community. It's actually an Earth Regenerators member who uses crypto, who's just watching what we're doing. He's like, I didn't even know I could do crypto because they haven't been paying that much attention. But could you? And I'm like, sure. And by suggesting they do it in Regen, we're actually investing in the infrastructure of the Regen Network, just by being in relationship, because those who have Regen tokens get access to governing decisions for how the Regen network evolves. It's part of how the Regen network works. The owners are the people who hold the tokens. And so it's a distributed ownership, a distributed governance, which means it's a lot more than money. And so I just wanted to name this to say what's happening with our Refi Barichara event is we are creating coherence in the field across Refi events around the world, because one of our sponsors is a group called Refi Spring, inspired by Arab Spring, where they're trying to get Refi events to happen all over the world at once, and they're helping them to happen and connecting people and marketing them. So we at Refi Barichara are now connected with about 20 other projects in different countries around the world that are all happening within the same 3 or 4 month period. And regenerative practitioners all over the world are finding each other through this process. By hosting our event now, we are weaving into that space, and they are weaving into each other through our space and through each other's spaces. So something really big is happening. And so I just want to tell you the story that Refi Barichara is not a 5-day event. It already started. It's already working. Project teams have already formed. Resources have already been gathered. New potentials and projects have already begun. And the event, the actual event, starts in a little less than a month. And so I wanted to paint a picture of that complexity for you to say that as we have this healing process within the community, as we're forming a community fund, this global web of relationships is cross-pollinating in every direction in a very confusing but very exciting way. And we all just need to sit with the potentials of what's happening and find our way into it. And so I've just shared stories for a really long time. But I wanted to tell these 3 stories because if we focus too narrowly on what is the Barichara Ecoversity or what's happening with Margarita's work with the transformation of food systems, or wow, that's really cool, that's entropic agroforestry work, each of those stories is so complex, we just fill all of our time with them. But what's actually happening is something so much bigger. And it's not just happening here. But I wanted you to feel into the energy of these different levels. Healing of cultural traumas, organizations coming into different kinds of empowerment, individual people weaving relationships that will later birth new organizational forms, while we have a tapestry of cross-pollination across the whole planet. And as all of that is happening, there's something special about Barichara. And the last thing I want to say is there was a moment when there's 3 men in the executive committee of Asociación Aquí Leopada, where I was speaking and one of them heard me say something. I was saying, you know, people from all over the world have started coming to Barichara because of the bioparque. The bioparque started it. That's when Thomas and Eva came, when Tyler came, later when others came, when Rachel came for the first time, when Rachel came for the second time. She's doing work in the bioparque and on and on. Dan came, and what did? We pulled grass in the bioparque. And so the bioparque has been the initial attractor of people around the world. And all I said was, I said it in Spanish, of course, this campesino man who doesn't speak English. I said, people from all over the world are coming, and the bioparque is what is bringing them here. And I believe that the Patriamarios, basically the local campesino people of this place, have such a profoundly important culture that they have something to teach people all over the world. And when I said this, I watched this man melt. His body. He didn't say a word. It was one of his like tough muscles sitting like this. He melted. I think the last thing he expected to hear from this crazy gringo, was that the world needs to come and learn about his people. I don't think he expected to hear that. And so it's just like how deep and penetrating and vulnerable and intimate this really is. I didn't know that those words of mine were going to have that effect. I wasn't trying to have that effect. I was just speaking my truth. And so there's something incredible about all the levels of this. And so I think what I want to invite for our dialogue in the rest of our time today is I want to ask the question, what are we learning? What is this that these Barichara updates are actually about? How do they relate to Benji giving a series of teach-ins on the common land model? How does it relate to an action committee for fundraising for a landscape model in Barichara? How does it relate to all this work with the refi space? Like, what is it that we're actually doing here? And I think like the 3 blind men and the elephant, I think the more of us who share what we feel it is, the more we're going to actually see what it is. Because I sense that it's bigger than any of us can see. And so, so I just want to invite that. What is it that we're doing here? Why do all of you keep coming back to these Thursday calls? What are you getting from them? What are you bringing from them? And so I want to ask that question, not for me, but for us. Claire, please.
I always feel like I'm the enthusiastic one with my hand up first. Just to say how much, well, really it does extend to the whole Earth Regenerators community, because the willingness to be vulnerable, to share the stories and to learn from each other, kind of like sort of the awkwardness of dancing and just being willing to dance even though you have no idea in the beginning and getting it wrong, but being there with each other. And that's what this feels like. And your stories were incredibly inspiring, because it's like little incremental ways of seeing a new way through. So the thing that was coming up for me was recognizing we're kind of in this moment in time that feels different than any other time. Inflation costs, and also realizing that people are at kind of a critical point right now where they have, after lockdowns of COVID, not being wanting to go back into the same work that they were doing before, and really having no idea of what they're wanting to do. But this kind of what you were talking about with the crypto does feel like it can create this decentralized new pathway forward. It's just so awkward for so many people because it creates so much confusion. We know so little about it, and fear. And so it feels to me like there's a lot of teaching and storytelling that's going to be required to sort of break down some of the fear, but also, I mean, it's language that people have no idea how to relate to. And it's stuff that even if the story is told in more of the technical bits, they'll glaze over because it's not their thing. So there's a lot to do there, but I just see there's a lot of potential, and just yeah, and particularly at this moment in time. And it just feels like, gosh, this is a story that's really important to be telling. And just trying to kind of figure out, well, gratitude for what you're doing, because you are trailblazing this. And but yeah, just how do we start to tell those stories so that they do become these beacons, the people, you know, there's so much wisdom in each of our communities. There will be people who can start picking it up and helping to tell that story, but it needs to be done in a way that just brings those kernels that you're starting to sow. So anyway, I just wanted to put that in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And just to show, I've got blisters like this one on my hand because Tyler and I have been using machetes to clear the trail on Las Albercas, which is the other story I didn't tell. Is I started actually working on Las Albercas for the first time this week. And it was Tyler and I did, I should say, Tyler and I did, because we're going to bring all the people from the Refi Barichara event to Las Albercas, and there's so much grass with all the rain, so much grass you can't walk on the land. And so we are clearing trails on a 10-hectare piece of land. It's huge. And Tyler and I leave the house at 6 in the morning and go spend time every day getting blisters and aching arms and backs. And just to name, like, trailblazing sometimes is doing something that feels crazy, even though it's not entirely clear that the purchase of the land is coming through and how it's all going to work. And we stay in that. And bless you, Dan, for the part that you're doing in this, that we have to stay true to the purpose of what all this is. And that's just extremely important right now because of how weird the world has gotten. So just really just honoring that. And on to you, Stan.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. These are real inspiring stories, all three of them and more. And the group, Claire, for echoing this story. You know, what are we learning? And, you know, I think a lot of it is, you know, place-based. But to me, the part of the Joe stories is the grounding in the soil. So getting real, getting up at 4 in the morning and getting dirty, you know, and sometimes blisters. But I think getting back to the, not just the land, but kind of the story around the land. And so, you know, one of our most satisfying things has been in our backyard planting tomatoes, and now it's tomato harvest. But part of it is getting down on your knees in the dirt and actually learning the backyard plant by plant and cultivating what I thought was the garden, but actually cultivating the family is what's happening. So I actually got encouraged to do this, told to do this by my kids. You know, your backyard is, you know, killing birds. Have you heard about nematodes? You should. So now I'm growing nematodes and worms and appreciating the birds coming back. But this is just the dirt in the backyard, you know. So it's, you know, pulling grass, pulling weeds in the backyard, but that's therapeutic. And so my granddaughter just came down for this weekend, and so we were comparing backyards, backyard stories. And, you know, she's pulling ivy, and we got to see my son's backyard. And then he's the one who sort of inspired it. His wife is in the Audubon Society, and they've certified their backyard. And he had this huge pile of sawdust that they thought they could get for free. It turned out to be, you know, 2 months worth of blisters. But what happened was, because he was working in the yard all the time, and because they did have an Audubon certified sign in their front yard, it became contagious, just like you're talking about. And when I went back to his neighborhood a year later, there are other signs around in the other yards. Some of the fences are torn down, and there's a lot more stuff planted all over the place. And it's much more walkable. and the integration to the essentially Olmsted Park Plan is kind of getting rebirthed. Well, the Olmsted Park Plan is an elegant story, and Cascadia is an elegant. So when we start reading about other countries, they chop down all their trees, right? They don't have trees. We have Doug firs everywhere. They don't. So I think these stories start to help people appreciate their backyards. They spend more time in their backyards. They spend more time thinking about nematodes than about dollars. So, we don't really brag that much about being nematode millionaires, but it is contagious, and I think it does make all the gatherings more fun. So I think, what are we learning from that? I think we can do this in our backyards. And I think it's the storytelling and learning how to tell the real stories about the traumas and how the nematodes help. So thank you. I think we can do this in our backyards and just connect it up to Olmsted Parks or whatever the indigenous patterns were for huckleberries.
Thank you, Stan. I think it's really powerful to connect it to our own lives in as much of an embodied way as we can. Part of my reason for asking the question, what are we learning and what are we doing here, is that there's a kind of confusion about what is the ecoversity. I actually like the confusion because I like it to have multiple meanings. I like to not pick a meaning yet, to let it be indigenous, to let it be pluralistic, to let it be dynamic, and to let it be evolutionary. And one way the ecoversity already exists is that I envisioned a design school for earth regeneration when I was in Costa Rica, and it was born 6 weeks after we arrived in Barichara when Earth Regenerators was created. And so the ecoversity in one sense is a distributed design school, and increasingly people all around the world are learning from Barichara as part of the ecoversity in many, many, many different ways. And that is not is that the Barichara ecoversity? Yes and no. See how it's intentionally vague. It's not vague by accident. It's meant to be inclusive of various ways of learning until we gradually get clear about how we parse and separate the different pieces. How does what's happening in Barichara relate to OSA in Costa Rica? We'll find out. We don't know yet. We'll find out. So it's okay if things are vague. That's good that they're vague for a while. But the key thing I see in all of this is we are all being changed in ways that are hard for us to measure, hard for us to name, but it's very much happening. And when I ask, what do we feel like this is that we're learning? I ask it to invite different perspectives about what it is we might be creating, what we might call into being. Because what I see happening right now in Barichara is there's a pattern here within the territory that is palpable and inspiring and amazing, mostly led by local people. And then there's something connecting it to the outside world, connecting to lots of other places where people are doing lots of other things. And I see both of those as almost containers. There's a container of what happens locally, and there's a container of what happens between the local and the non-local. And there's something about those that really matters to have both. And so I really sense for example, if we can figure out how to raise money for a landscape team, for a core team for Barichara as earth regenerators, Jonathan's helping with that. Gail wants to help with that. Others want to help that. How do we help with that? Well, if we can do that, can we do it for another bioregion? Can we do it for another place in another part of the planet? And it's well, if we can't do it in one place, we can't do it in any place. And so we got to start somewhere. And for some things we're doing, the best place to start will be Barichara. For other things, definitely not, because there are other things happening. But this is an interesting question, is how do we all leverage what's happening in Barichara into this global movement? And how do we all leverage what's happening in the other places into this global movement? And I think that one of the key things is to create a standard language, in the sense of, I knew about common land and the 4 returns and the 3 zones and the core team, and I didn't teach it. I wrote a comment about it in a chapter of my book. It took Benji to go and teach it. He's now taught 4 classes on it, however many it's been. I haven't been counting, between 3 and 5. 2, I thought there were more than that. Oh my gosh. Well,
They were
anyway.
long.
But you see, like, this way of learning together is how Barichara makes concrete what Benji's talking about, right? It makes it concrete because it hasn't been created here yet, but we can see how we might. Whereas if you went to Spain, where Common Land created their model in 2012, it's obscure because we can't really see how it was then. Whereas we can see how this is now. So we can see how to build this. We can't actually see how they built that. And so it's really important for us to have moments of creation. Moments of creation where we experience the creation as active participants so that we get experience and learn how. So what I feel may be really beautiful for us to hold, it's something that I seeded into our fundraising team last Friday, was I let the fundraising team know that fundraising isn't about fundraising. Rachel's sitting here, she's just gonna nod really big. I could show you her nodding, but she's backlit, so you basically see a dark face. Which is, fundraising is about personal storytelling and personal connection. And fundraising happens vicariously if it happens at all, because it's secondary. It's actually not even the important thing. And so what we talked about last Friday was, how do we tell our personal stories and how do we practice? Because our personal stories are how we're going to change everyone. We're going to change some people around us. And so if I was to invite you to walk away from today and say, I told you stories about Milena. I told you stories about Asociación Aquí Leopardo. I told you stories about Refi Barichara. All right, I told you 3 stories. What stories would you tell? I'm not talking about Barichara, just like, what stories would you tell? There are stories to be told about what each of us are experiencing. What stories would you tell about your experience with Earth Regenerators? What stories would you tell about something else that's related to Earth Regeneration that you're a part of? How would you tell that story? On Saturday, I had this really nice moment in the van where I overheard Jacob, I didn't tell Jacob this, telling the story to this woman, Benny. He's telling her about his experiences. And he was saying all these things he's learning by practicing on the land. I'm just sitting back sort of glowing, going, it's so cool to watch Jacob telling his story. Damn, Jacob, you did a good job telling that story. And, you know, the real power is in those moments. When he was sitting there talking to her, he was being inspiring with an honest story. And this is our secret power. Our secret power is to tell stories to each other. So I want to invite you to just hold that and think about it, and better yet, practice it. If sometime in the next week you can find someone to tell some of your story to, it will do you good. It turns out it's therapeutic for us to tell our own stories. And amazingly, when we tell our own stories in service to another person, we feel good about ourselves and we become more loved. So it actually reduces our ego needs for gratification, actually reduces them. We become less egotistical by telling our own stories, if we tell them in service to someone else. You tell your story to help someone else. And so I just want to invite you, if you will take a moment to do it sometime in the next week, tell a story of yours to someone you care about in service to them. Help them understand something you've been going through. Help them have inspiration if they're feeling depressed and down. Give them an insight about something that they may not know they even need to deal with. But practice telling your personal story. And I think if we all do this, we're going to discover that as we tell our stories, we're going to feel the power of it. And then we're going to realize that we can tell them together. And as we tell them together, we're going to discover the secret of humanity, which is we can create imagined worlds together and then manifest them. And so, by the way, I uploaded all of my Crowdcast webinars to YouTube, about 50 of them in the last week and a half. And so if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll find them, including one of them that's about collective dreaming and becoming the weave, and a few others you can find there that are about exactly this topic if you're curious. Maybe because I think we may all be in a bit of an introspective mode. What I want to invite is to stay in the weirdness of whatever's happening in the world. Be uncomfortable if that's what is appropriate to you. Be confused, be overwhelmed, be a little sad, be a little annoyed, be hopeful, be all of it in the same 2-hour period, because the world is crazy right now. And then tell your story to someone. Tell your story to someone and watch what happens. And we together will create all of this by weaving our stories. What's happening in Barichara right now is very special, but that's only because of where it is in its process. And because Barichara is special, just like many other places are special in their own way. And recovering the specialness of place is a big part of bioregionalism. It's not only the story of place and belonging in place, it's the specialness of place, the felt experience of the specialness. So feel into how those stories play out in your life, and then share one of those stories with someone else. And if you feel like it afterwards, share your experience of telling your story back to Earth Regenerators. What happened when you shared your story? And by the way, this is also a standard political organizing approach. It's how Barack Obama became president in 2008, was people telling their own stories person by person. It's the Cesar Chavez model of community organizing. So it's tried and true, and it works. Claire.
You're bringing up something for me, Joe, and I feel that I would really like to bring it in. When you talk about telling your own story, first of all, I just wanted to say about Benji and just what the sessions we're doing on a Wednesday, going and looking at both the tools and also so the couch and stone soup gathering. We're sort of looking at how do we collect how do we start these conversations for bioregionalism learning, have just been amazing. But what it's doing is, as we tell those stories, we're finding the others, and that collective learning process. It was I really just wanted to bring in the finding the others, because you cannot plan it, you can't pre-plan it, you can't know what's going to unlock as the stories get told. But as they get told, it triggers things for others that then bring them in, and it's pretty exciting to see it unfolding. Yeah. So and boy, somebody with the other piece I also want to just bring in is that I think we all have gifts, we also have deficits, and sort of knowing what they are and learning how we can work together effectively. I think sometimes the deficits are what hold us back, and I think those become huge barriers. And what I've noticed is that there's this really forgiving space of working together because we see the potential, but trying to figure through, I think the more we understand what the gifts and the deficits are that we have, we can ask for what we need the support in. So yeah, just really wanted to bring that forward, because I've noticed just how much it feels like we've been able to move forward with the things we're doing in bioregional catalysts by working like that. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's really important actually, to have the vulnerability to make visible what we need as a way of becoming ready to receive it. Because we won't receive what we need unless we're able to be vulnerable. And so there's something really important in that, a big part of this work. So I feel like we're at a good place to stop for now and just say, as all of this is unfolding, just keep feeling into what is the role for you in this moment. What should you be doing as part of this? Because unlike many people in the world, we are actively feeling it, sense making about it, and talking about it. And so we have a responsibility to all the people who don't feel and sense this. We have a responsibility. What is it that you're called to do as part of this right now? What is it? Only your heart can answer that question. So give yourself the space to feel into it. And what we'll be doing here in Barichara is just continue to hold our part of this planetary web and connect with all of you wherever the threads may be. So with that, thank you everyone, and onward, fellow humans.
See you, Joe. Thank you.